Just 1 week from today, Americans across this land will go to the polls. They may deliver a stinging rebuke to President Obama by voting Democrats out of office and giving Republicans control of the Senate.
Many of the key races are still too close to call, and it all may come down to who shows up to vote. Dale Hurd has the story.
Polls show control of the U.S. Senate is coming down to the proverbial wire, with Democrats and Republicans locked in tight races in key contests in Colorado, Iowa, Kansas, Arkansas, and North Carolina. In Iowa, Republican Jody Ernst has a 3-point lead over Democrat Bruce Braley with ads like this one.
I grew up castrating hogs on an Iowa farm, so when I get to Washington, I'll know how to cut pork. Washington's full of big spenders. Let's make them squeal.
A new CNN poll shows that 7 out of 10 Americans are angry at the direction the country is headed, and 53% disapprove of the president's job performance. In the Senate, Republicans need a net gain of only 6 seats.
Well, I think we will hold the Senate. You know, I know all the pundits are saying Republicans will take the Senate. Democrats are going to prove the pundits wrong on Election Day when we keep the Senate.
This is going to be a good year for Republicans. It's a good environment for us. Luke talked earlier about the incompetence that some people feel about the Obama administration. I mean, that's catching up to them.
Some candidates are touting their military service, while others want voters to know they can handle a gun. It's going to come down to who shows up on Election Day and who stays home. Evangelicals, millennials, blacks, Hispanics. CBN News political editor John Wonke.
You know, if the Democrats use their micro-targeting system that they have, then they can keep some of these races close and maybe even keep the Republicans from taking the Senate. But Republicans have the sentiment, the anti-Obama feeling, the feeling that the country's on the wrong track, and that is their ace in the hole going into Tuesday.
Polls may make projections, but the only poll that counts is on Election Day. Dale Hurd, CBN News.
Well, we're going to have a special coverage at the 700 Club, and also online. You can be watching what's happening and getting updates on our election coverage on cbnnews.com, including alerts with news app and emails. Our reporters will be posting on Facebook and Twitter. Coverage on election night will start at 7 p.m. In other news, we will not focus too much on our election, but whatever's happening in the world is going to impact very strongly our attitude toward the president. While the world is focused on the fight against ISIS, Israel has been warning that there's a much more dangerous long-term threat in the Middle East. John Jessup has that story from our CBN News Bureau in Washington.
Pat, as you mentioned, the U.S. and its allies have been launching limited attacks on the U.S. Meanwhile, Iran has been working on its nuclear program uninterrupted. And as Chris Mitchell reports, Israel worries the international negotiations on the nuclear program may end up producing a bad deal.
For the first time in years, much of the world and many Arab countries appear unified, this time against ISIS terrorists. Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, however, continues to sound the alarm over the danger of a nuclear Iran.
ISIS must be defeated. But to defeat ISIS and leave Iran as a threshold nuclear power is to win the battle and lose the war.
Netanyahu and other Israeli officials warn that Iran's nuclear program is what keeps them up at night. One official said that ISIS is a 5-year problem, but Iran is a 50-year problem.
And I am here to tell you that Israel is deeply concerned.
That concern, according to Intelligence Minister Yuval Steinitz, is about negotiations over Iran's nuclear program.
The Iranians have shown no real flexibility on the 2 main issues. The issue of the centrifuge facilities, centrifuges for enrichment of uranium, and the heavy water reactor in Iraq.
Steinitz also said Israel worries negotiators will end up with a bad deal. He maintains no deal is better than a bad deal.
No deal means that you stand by your principle, that you are not giving up, that you are not sacrificing the future of the world, that you are not sacrificing global security, that you are not ready that what happened with North Korea will repeat itself after 1 or 2 or 3 years with Iran.
And Middle East analyst Jonathan Spire comes back to the fight against ISIS and how it could ironically help Iran.
So if it becomes the paramount or the sole goal of Western policy to destroy Sunni Islamism and Sunni jihadis in these areas, the effective result of that will be, by default, so to speak, to strengthen the enemies of those forces, which are not democratic forces, they're pro-Iranian forces. The Shia Islamists align with Iran. So it's crucial to keep that bigger picture in mind, I think, if we are to avoid effectively strengthening, or even absurdly, acting in cooperation with our most dangerous enemies in the region.
Chris Mitchell, CBN News, Jerusalem.
Pat, just last week, a top Iranian official involved in those nuclear talks said Iran won't take any backward steps on its nuclear program.
They recognize that we have a weak president, and the Saudis, excuse me, the Saudis are doing what they can to take care of their own interests. They're joining with Egypt, joining with Kuwait, joining with the Emirates, and behind the scenes joining with Israel as a coalition to stand against Iran and also, of course, against ISIS. But right now, the Israeli defense minister was here in Washington. The vice president refused to meet with him. The secretary of state refused to meet with him. And they're doing everything they can to stick their finger in the eye of our closest ally in the Middle East. And they have insulted over and over again. They have forced the prime minister of Israel to make steps that he thought were unwise for his country, but he's done it to appease America. And now all of a sudden he says, look, I've had it with you guys, and we're not going to take it any longer. And he's making a move that is in direct contravention of advice from the White House, because our allies no longer trust our president. John.
Pat, Israel will move forward with plans to build in East Jerusalem. Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu made that pledge in an address to Parliament Monday, and it comes despite pressure from the U.S. and other Western allies not to expand settlement construction. Israel is building about 1,000 housing units in the city, and Netanyahu said there's consensus to continue, just as every Israeli government has done since capturing East Jerusalem in 1967. That sector is home to the city's most sensitive holy sites. Palestinians want that part of Jerusalem to be their future capital, but Israel says Jerusalem as a whole will forever be the Israeli capital. Well, here at home, the nurse who was forced into quarantine in New Jersey after treating Ebola patients in West Africa is now free. Casey Hickox called her forced isolation in a hospital tent inhumane. She's now considering suing the state of New Jersey. Maine officials want Hickox to remain in her house for 21 days until after her last possible exposure to the virus. Her attorney says states should follow federal health guidelines, which only require monitoring. 9 states now require 21-day quarantine for healthcare workers returning from the Ebola hot zone. And doctors of Army soldiers, along with their general, are being isolated at their base in Italy after serving in West Africa to help the fight against Ebola. Pat?
There again, you've got the schizophrenic leadership of our nation. They're telling states, look, you can't quarantine people. It's not the right way to go. Yet the Army is quarantining its people in Italy when they get back out of the hot zone. It's just because we don't have any coherent policy. And the press aide of the president won't give a straight answer to what our policy is. And, you know, I heard something today that I thought was very telling as well. A commentary on our attitude toward Islam. The president had said, ISIS is not truly Islamic. ISIS, the name, is Islamic State in Syria or in the Levant. It isn't, and yet our president says, well, you say you're Islamic, but you really aren't. You say you're following Muhammad, but you really aren't. But they really are. And somehow, we have decided, as our policy of our government, we're going to separate the ideology of Islam from the activity of these extremist groups, and not realizing that the conduct of the extremist groups comes directly out of the commandments found in the Quran and in the Hadith. That's one more schizophrenic thing. It's small wonder their allies have no confidence in us. They don't know what we're doing, and they wonder because they realize what a great nation we are, and yet what bad leadership. John.
Pat, the Islamic group Boko Haram has captured dozens more girls and young women in northeast Nigeria, according to people who've escaped from the area. The captives are forced to become Muslims, forced into marriage, and raped, and hopes of rescuing the 200 girls kidnapped earlier this year are fading. Gary Lane has that story.
The Nigerian government recently raised hopes that a negotiated ceasefire with Boko Haram would lead to the release of the 219 kidnapped girls. Family members and advocates were optimistic.
And we're still watching. We're extremely anxious.
But the ceasefire fell apart, and fighting with the Islamic terrorist group continues. Many people now believe all the girls may never be recovered.
Do you think they have the girls from Chibok, or have they sold them into slavery?
We're not sure that Boko Haram is even capable of retrieving the girls that they are promising to release to the government at the moment. So there's a mixture. I believe they married some off to their own warlords and have scattered some of them far across the region.
Nigeria analyst Peyi Soyinka Arawele confirms that some of the kidnapped girls have actually been used in suicide bomb attacks. And she says if some girls are freed, they may not be the girls who were kidnapped last April in Chibok.
They have continued abducting more women over the past few days since the ceasefire was announced. And it is believed by some observers in the villages that the Boko Haram only intend to release the new victims that they have recently abducted and not the girls from Chibok.
276 schoolgirls, many of them Christians, were kidnapped at their boarding school. 57 eventually escaped from captivity. An international outcry ensued over the kidnappings. Demonstrations like this one, called #BringBackOurGirls, went viral on the internet and worldwide. President Obama was even moved to take action. He sent a team of security advisors to Nigeria to help the rescue effort. But Professor Arawele says many Nigerians believe their military is incapable of defeating Boko Haram, despite U.S. assistance.
The military certainly is floundering, it is struggling, has not been very successful. Even on the day that the ceasefire was announced, towns were attacked, people were killed, and flags were hoisted by Boko Haram.
And Ms. Arawele says the Nigerian army alone cannot defeat Islamic extremism. She suggests before change can take place, progressives and Muslims must admit religion plays a role in the violence.
Those who are Muslims today might have to do some critical self-assessment of the reality of how the faith is being utilized to wage war against their fellow citizens.
And after waiting for a half year, the families of the girls now grow impatient, hoping and praying for a breakthrough that will finally bring back their girls. Gary Lane, CBN News.
And of course, we echo those prayers for their safe return. Pat?
You know, I hate to sound bellicose, but some years ago, there was an organization called Executive Solutions, made up primarily of South African warriors, fighters, trained military men. There was a situation in Sierra Leone of chaos, rebellion, and a small group of rebels was terrorizing the country. Executive Solution went in there and just moved through. They were expert fighters and brilliant marksmen, and they just killed those people as fast as they could kill them. And the whole rebellion collapsed and the country went back to peace. But because it was South Africans involved, the rulers in the other countries said, well, we can't have white South Africans coming in this way. We've got to tell them to stand down, and so they did. But they need something like that in this Boko Haram. It's a small group of people, and they're terrorizing the biggest nation in Africa. And what's got to be done, I know that sounds terrible, is they've got to go in there and kill those people because they will kill others. They are murdering thugs. And they need to be put down, and they need to be put down with force of people who know how to fight. We have fighters, we have the Delta Force, and we have the SEALs, and we have others, but I don't think America is going to send its prized warriors into that situation. But I imagine in South Africa or other countries, their people are available, maybe in Kenya, maybe in other countries. But there needs to be a force of skilled fighters to go in and put down that rebellion once and for all and free those girls and stop this rebellion lest it eats at the heart of Nigeria. We've got some other news that has to do with what you pay at the price at the pump for your gasoline. John.
Pat, the price of oil, as you mentioned, and what you pay at the gas pump could fall still lower next year. Goldman Sachs says oil could go as low as $70 a barrel. Oil has fallen sharply in the last few months after hitting nearly $108 midsummer. It's down now to around $80, and that's meant a huge drop in gas prices as well. The average is now $3.04 a gallon, the lowest level in 4 years. Pat, I recently heard someone say it's like going back in time.
Well, if you went back to my time, buddy, it was 26 cents a gallon, and they had price wars to bring it down to 21 cents. So to say we can say happy days are here again because it's $3 a gallon, to me is a little, yippee, it's not $4 a gallon, it's only $3. Oh, I'm so happy.
The number of Islamic extremists is growing rapidly in Germany. The country's domestic intelligence agency estimates some 6,300 people there are members of a fundamentalist strain of Islam known as Salafism, and that number could rise to 7,000 by the end of the year. That's compared to about 3,800 3 years ago. Authorities estimate around 450 Salafis have already left Germany to join Islamic groups fighting in Syria and in Iraq. People around the world are remembering evangelist Johnny Lee Clary. He was a former imperial wizard of the Ku Klux Klan who experienced a radical conversion to Christianity. Clary died of a heart attack last week at age 55. He said he felt compelled to give his life to the Lord after reading the story of the prodigal son in Luke chapter 15. He said, quote, "I finally got on my knees and said, God, my life is screwed up. God, I'm in a mess. I need your help. I felt like a new person, brand new creation. I felt like I had a weight lifted off my shoulders." After becoming a Christian, Clary learned how to love and live in unity with all people. He became the first Caucasian elder in the Church of God in Christ, a predominantly African-American denomination. Now remember, you can always get the latest from CBN News by going to our website, cbnnews.com.